Hello, this is Jill Fielding, and this is what's caught my eye in the media this week. Well, there's been a lot of chitter-chatter about how people can get started on the property ladder, and first-time buyers are having a terrible time and they've got to save up and live with their parents and all that kind of stuff. Well, I just wanted to say there's nothing new in that. We've always had to save up and live with our parents in order to get on the property ladder. And I remember my dad, when he came out of the army in 1945 and he'd met his blushing bride, my mum, they actually lived with his dad. My parents lived downstairs and granddad lived upstairs, and it was perfectly normal for multi-generational living, and we have to get used to it, and there's nothing new in that. And what was also interesting about that house is that when my brother came along in 1948, granddad moved out. Don't know why, really. It might have been the crying baby, but granddad moved out and my dad then took over the tenancy for the whole house. And he approached the landlord and said, "Can I buy this property from you?" And the landlord said, "Yeah, sure." And they had a little book and an arrangement, and my dad paid the landlord 10 bob a week, which is the equivalent of 50p in today's money. Now, I mention that story and the multi-generational living because I just want to say there's nothing new in any of that. The way that my dad bought the house is now called vendor financing, and we think it's a modern thing and trendy and maybe American, I don't know, but no, it isn't. It's been around for centuries. My dad did it in the 1940s, and my dad was no wealth creator. He wasn't interested in money per se. He was just a normal guy going about his business, and my dad was doing all these revolutionary things in the 1940s. So there's nothing new. Now, figures out from Rightmove this week suggest that in the month from January to February, property prices on average moved up by nearly £8,000 in the month. Now, I extrapolated that, and that turns out to be £96,000 over a year. And if you gross that up for tax and NI, it comes to about 125,000 or so. And I doubt very much whether many of us earn 125,000 or more, but your property does. And it's a truism that your property will earn more for you over a working life than you do working for a living. So get started with property investing, buy a property as early as you can, because it will outpace you, it will outpace your earnings, and it will serve you into retirement. Now, apparently during the pandemic, according to Zoopla, we repurposed about 8.9 million bedrooms around the country for other use. And 5 million of those spare bedrooms became offices, 1.3 million became gyms, 984,000 became a bar, 900,000 became a cinema. Now that's amazing, isn't it? And 688,000 became classrooms. And apparently we spent an average of £3,714 on those repurposing or conversions. But what Zoopla doesn't mention is what happened to all the other rooms that weren't turned into cinemas, because I suspect there were an awful lot of bedrooms turned into junk rooms, drying rooms for the laundry, argument spaces, falling asleep spaces, all kinds of weird and wacky uses that aren't mentioned on the posh list. Now, I know why Zoopla are doing it, because obviously they have to describe properties accurately. And of course, they can describe a three-bedroom house as a two-bedroom house with an office. But would they actually describe a three-bedroom house as a two-bedroom house and a DOS room or a junk room? I doubt it, but let's see what happens. Now, to rent or to buy, it's an age-old question, and I'm asked it all the time, not only about property. And of course, the adage that comes down, I think, from John Paul Getty, or maybe even further, is that if the thing that you're buying is going to go up in value, you buy it. And if it's going to go down in value, you rent it. So that would hold true for any asset that you're buying, anything that you're buying. And I noticed in the media this week about handbags. Now, I'm not really a handbag lady, but you know, I've got a few handbags, as every woman does. But I noticed that some handbags, the fashionable ones, are now selling for a couple of £1,000. Now, that seems to be a huge amount of money to me. But of course, there's an organisation that now will rent you a handbag, and apparently a Gucci handbag will rent for about £40 per week. Now, it strikes me that if I rented a handbag for a week, I'd want to go out with it every single day to get my money's worth. But I don't know how people use it, but it's a very sensible idea. So buying rather than renting, buy if the property asset thing you're buying is going to go up. And you rent if it's going to go down. So obviously with property, the best thing to do is to buy, and buy it as soon as you can. Now, it pays to think long term, and I was reading this week about China, the country, and I'm old enough to remember in 1980 when they implemented their one-child policy. Now, that meant families, couples could only have one child, and because boys were more highly respected and regarded than girls, a lot more boys were born than girls, and girl babies often got abandoned by the roadside or worse. And I know as a couple, my husband and I actually considered it adopting a girl Chinese baby because there were so many in adoption houses and so on. Fast forward to today, and that has created a problem because they now have 35 million more men than women, half of which are of marriageable age. And of course, that's created no end of problems because there's not enough ladies and wives to go around. There's some pockets of civil unrest because there's huge numbers of single men with nothing to do and no families and so on. So it's caused quite a problem. And also with diminishing birth rates, China has been forced into state-funded IVF and fertility treatment. So they've gone from you can't have any babies or you can only have one, right the way through to please can you have more babies and we'll pay for the fertility treatment. Now, obviously, China can do that. It's a huge country and it can bail itself out financially. But as individuals, we can't. And the decisions we make today affect us in 30 years' time, 20 years' time, and so on. So start investing, start looking at your future finances because it will pay off into the future. And think about what you're going to need in the future so that you make a better choice, a better decision. And of course, if you're doing nothing about your financial future today, that will bite you in the bottom in 20 or 30 years' time, and you won't have the money to bail yourself out. So think long term, think about your decisions and get your money sorted now. It'll help you in the future and you won't have to do an about turn with your finances. Well, that's it for this week. Please keep safe. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.